transportation, habitat, conservation, and integrated planning.
Commissioners, tab 15 is an informational item. Aaron Hake, Interim Regional Conservation Deputy Executive Director at the Riverside County Transportation Commission, will provide a presentation on the Western Riverside County Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan. Mr. Hake will also discuss the benefits of coordinating planning for transportation infrastructure, housing development, and biodiversity protection. With that, I will turn it over to Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Hake.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and thank you, Ms. Driller. You may be wondering why a conservation agency is before you today, and you may also wonder why a transportation agency is running a conservation agency. As the slides come up on the screen, you'll see that RCTC is managing the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan here in Western Riverside County. It's novel, it's different, unexpected, and that by definition is innovation. And I understand the name of this item is Innovations in Transportation. That's why I'm here today. So if the slides, are the slides on the screen? Okay, let's go to the second slide, please. Perfect. Okay, so I want to start by asking an optimistic question. What if there was a proactive strategy to streamline infrastructure and housing projects while protecting biodiversity and natural lands? Next slide, please. And what if it already exists? Here in Western Riverside County, Commissioners, this is not a what if situation, it's a what is situation. Nearly 20 years ago, Riverside County leaders put forward a transformational vision to make our county a national leader in sustainable growth. And the result is the Riverside County Integrated Project. Its components are: 1, a general land use plan to guide the rapid pace of development here; 2, a process to identify necessary infrastructure improvements, which I know is all very important to you; and 3 is the creation of the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, or known as the MSHCP. I know it's an acronym. I'll refer to it as the Conservation Plan. I'll refer to it as the Conservation Plan today.
Thank you.
The Conservation Plan is the cornerstone of the integrated transportation, land use, and environmental policy here in Western Riverside County. And ours is one of 17 natural community conservation plans throughout the state of California. And you'll see on the map here in the red circle that Riverside County actually has 2 of these conservation plans. There's one also in the Coachella Valley to our east. And this means that nearly every resident of Riverside County, all 2.5 million of us, almost all of them, live within one of these conservation plans. And we've been at it for almost 2 decades. NCCPs, or these conservation plans, streamline infrastructure and land use projects. And they do this by, rather than taking a project by project mitigation approach, they proactively plan for whole ecosystems. They are a regional blueprint for conservation, biodiversity, and growth. So think of it this way. People and goods, as you know, need regional transportation corridors to move. Wildlife also needs regional corridors to move. Together, NCCPs do accomplish these 2 things. And you may ask how. Here in Riverside County, developers pay impact fees. That impact fee revenue goes to pay for purchasing habitat. Some developers dedicate part of their land to conservation, and project sponsors, such as RCTC or a city or the county, will demonstrate that their project is consistent with this plan. And rather than deal with the state and federal wildlife agencies alone, individually with piecemeal mitigation, they come through us. And in turn, those projects then receive coverage under the state and federal Endangered Species Acts. They also get a benefit under CEQA. They are CEQA compliant if they're consistent with the plan for impacts to rare, threatened, or special status species and wildlife movement. And this can be a difficult thing, but here we're dealing with it in a holistic, consistent way. This provides predictability and in many cases, time savings for projects. NCCPs, or conservation plans, are true partnerships between state and local government. And in the case of both the Coachella Valley plan here and in Western Riverside County, they also include the federal government as a partner as well. and all parties share a formal commitment in writing to move projects forward and achieve conservation goals. Here in Western Riverside, we go above and beyond any in the country, and we're really proud of this. It covers over 1 million acres. It's the largest in the United States. We protect 146 species. 33 of those species are endangered here in Riverside County. The benefits of this plan are powerful, and so are the incentives. And here's the tie to transportation. Our cities and the county cannot receive their self-help transportation sales tax dollars from Measure A unless they participate in the conservation plan. This also goes for the Coachella Valley plan as well. All of the projects within our sales tax measure are covered by the conservation plan. The voters here have approved this. And finally, I do want to add one more thing. Our state and federal partners, they have committed to acquire approximately 1/6 of the habitat that we need. So they're contributing as well. The plan accelerates transportation project delivery, including several projects that this commission has funded. Some of these projects that have benefited include a 24-mile commuter rail extension to Paris, the Santa Ana River Trail project, which you may have heard of. It's a regional active transportation project we are working on here at RCTC, and a $1.4 billion express lanes project on the 91 corridor, which, as you know, is one of the most congested in California. This process has also benefited the State Route 60 truck lanes project, which this commission has funded through both the SHOP and the STIP. And another piece of trivia here, about a decade ago, this commission allocated funding from the SHOP to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to fund oversight and management of this conservation plan. I think that's pretty unique. So implementing this conservation plan is certainly not easy, and it's not perfect. We do have our challenges, but you can help, and we think it makes sense for the CTC and our state partners to do so. These conservation plans, as I've outlined, have a clear and direct nexus to transportation and all other types of infrastructure as well. And it's clear that if we're going to continue delivering projects for tomorrow's transportation system, and if we're going to have a climate resilient future, we need integrated plans like this to succeed. So first, we ask you to look at these conservation plans as ready-to-go vehicles. As I mentioned, there are 17 across the state already. Look at them as ready-to-go vehicles to achieve the state's climate change goals. And note that they already have state and local buy-off. We've all signed on the dotted line to do these things already. And second, this is our biggest point. Please designate these conservation plans as valid project mitigation for achieving climate change goals. This could be when you're developing program guidelines or looking at other ways to distribute funding and getting our projects through the process. We believe that when transportation and land use projects are investing millions and millions of dollars into protecting the biosphere here, it should count. So I realize that this tool may be new to many of you. What I want you to know is that it's not new here in Riverside County. And I want to acknowledge something that Commissioner Alvarado said earlier in the meeting that stuck with me. You said, we don't solution. And to us, we think this is a solution. And we're honored to present this to you. We're honored that you're here in Riverside County to take a look at this innovation and see what we can do with it. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have any questions?
They're wonderful, sir. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we really appreciate your presentation. We're looking forward to learning more and coming back to you with questions as well.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thanks again. With that, we're going to go to item 16, and that is the state and federal legislative matters. Paul Golozewski.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tab 16 is an action item to approve the Commission's 2020 annual report to the legislature. This report is a statutory requirement that the Commission must fulfill each year by December 15th. The report includes the Commission's accomplishments during 2021, which were highlighted earlier during the opening remarks, so I won't go through them in detail, other than to again note the importance of the Commission's work for continued progress on keeping California's transportation system in good repair as required under SB 1, the economic and job creation benefits of the Commission's investments, and the progress on enhancing equity and climate considerations in the Commission's programs and policies through new initiatives. Also, the Commission's annual report highlights the Commission's proposed $2 billion funding augmentation for active transportation and $2.5 billion augmentation for transit, which will be discussed in more detail today as part of tab 18. With that, there are no updates at the moment regarding state legislation because the legislature remains on recess until January 3rd. And regarding federal matters and the infrastructure legislation, as was mentioned earlier, Commission staff are underway considering implementation issues and still awaiting the FHWA guidance, and will be reporting back with more detail at our January meeting. I would just note for now that with past federal funding acts, including the federal COVID relief funds received earlier this year, the overall funds were split 60% for state programs and 40% for regional and local programs. That concludes my report. Staff recommends you approve this item to transmit the annual report to the legislature.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have any questions? Commissioner Liu?
You can call me Joe if you can't remember our last.
No, I know.
got
It was
two
like,
first
I
names.
almost want to call you Joe, so
I know you want. I saw that. You were struggling with it.
sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mhm.
Paul, I hadn't thought about it till today, but with regard to our recommendations in the annual report, we're going to have a big surplus again this year, it looks like. And in California, we have a spending limit called the state allocation limit, also called the GAN limit. And one exemption to that limit in terms of expenditures or capital outlays, which can and may include transportation projects, especially ones that we've been supporting, right? Such as Vice Chair Alvarado's motion that we adopted with regard to active transportation and public transit. I'm wondering if it's not too late. Maybe we could stick it in a footnote or we could attach it to something. Would it be a good idea to include a reminder to the governor and the legislature that when coming up against these spending limits, we have no problem with returning money to taxpayers, but they should also consider the possibility of using some of that money to fund capital outlays in transportation?
Yeah, I see no issue with including that as part of our recommendation if the chair and the other commissioners agree.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Liu. Commissioner Gardino,
Well, thanks for your.
can you speak into the microphone?
There are too many microphones. Paul, thank you for the excellent work that you and your professional staff colleagues have done in putting together the report. And yes, in addition to the $2 billion that Vice Chair Alvarado had recommended and that we approved is $2.5 billion more for transit improvements as well, for a total of $4.5 billion. What I'd like to emphasize though is yes, right now there's a $31 billion surplus that we're expecting. We should not forget the May revise. There may be another surplus.
That's right.
So we should be planning ahead for all of 2022 as we do our planning and our outreach to legislative leaders, the administration, and the governor.
Thank you very much. And I did see that Senator Newman wanted to speak as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Norton. So Commissioner Liu, you'll be pleased to hear, we had a meeting and a briefing last week about the prospective budget surplus, and that was a large portion of the discussion. The GAN limit and the fact that infrastructure improvements are exempt. And so there will be, we're aware of that at least in the Senate. And we're looking very hard at opportunities to invest some of that surplus exactly as you described.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you advocating for us in those rooms. And we are hearing so much about how much people really want to see those funds. And as you say, these are these once in a lifetime opportunities. And we really believe that this is an opportunity to get a jump start on the CAPTI goals and to move forward on some of these key issues that we've been talking about today. So thank you again for being an advocate for us as an ex officio member of the CTC.
Then if it's appropriate, can I move this item with that amendment?
I believe we have,
Oh.
I'm getting a motion here. Brandy, is there? Commissioner Davis wanted to speak and then we'll take your,
Thank
okay. Commissioner Davis?
No, I was going to offer to make a motion with the friendly amendment that I would suggest it would be that Commissioner Liu was talking about.
Okay, great. So Commissioner Davis moves, Commissioner Liu seconds.
There we go.
We all approve the addition as a friendly amendment. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Thank you so much, Paul. With that, we are going to go to the budget and allocation capacity, Paul and Keith Duncan.
Commissioners, tab 17 is an information item. Keith Duncan from Caltrans Division of Budgets will provide an update on our progress in allocating our available funding this fiscal year. He'll also provide some additional information on the federal IIJA.
There we go. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. As Paul mentioned, Keith Duncan with Caltrans Division of Budgets, and I'll be providing the budget and allocation capacity update. I want to see if it's on the. Oops.
For those listening in, we're just getting the presentation up and running.
And I know we're kind of short on time, so I will try to
Yes,
expedite
please.
things quite a bit.
You can talk through some of it right now.
That'll work. Okay, so a brief update just to get started. Commission activities through October, the commission has allocated about 25% or 2.1 billion. There we go. 2.1 billion of the total $8.2 billion allocation capacity across all transportation programs within the CTC's purview. The SHOP, the State Highway Operation Protection Program, has about 32% allocated. Other programs in the mid 20% and others below that. In comparison purposes, the last couple of years, we've been ranging about 35 to 40% allocated. So we are a bit lower than as compared to prior years. We have about a little over 600 million on the agenda over the next 2 days. So that's good to see the additional monies going on. In discussions with Paul, we do typically do a mid-year review. So we were reaching out to our program managers to get a status check on those program of projects. Next, we want to provide a departmental status report in relation to the G12. As you know, the G12 is a delegated authority by the commission to the department to be able to make adjustments to project allocations within certain thresholds. For those projects less than $1 million, the maximum adjustment is $200,000. And for those projects $1 million or more, the maximum adjustment is $200,000 plus 10% of the total project allocation. And as noted on the slide, in total, we've made 82 project allocation adjustments with a net savings of about $30.9 million. And to be more specific, for the SHOP, the State Highway Operation Protection Program, we made adjustments to 79 projects with a total value of $865 million, resulting in a net savings of about $31.5 million. And for the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program, we made 3 project adjustments that for projects valued at $25 million with a net increase of about $570,000. And I know Secretary Kim, Chief Deputy Kiever, Ms. Romano, everyone has already spoken to the bipartisan infrastructure law, the bill. So I won't go into too many details. Again, just for the second slide here, the last bullet, as Paul has already mentioned, traditionally with the FAST Act and previous acts, the split has been 60-40 with 60% going to the state programs and 40% going to local agencies. We do know that FHW will be releasing the apportionment notices and further guidance over the coming days and weeks. So we'll be looking to provide you update, working with commission staff to provide you updates. And also as tradition, January 10, the governor will be releasing his proposed budget for the upcoming 22-23 fiscal year. We will plan to provide a summary of all transportation related proposals that are included in that update. With that, I will wrap it up. I want to thank CTC staff, Caltrans financial programming, and Caltrans budget revenue staff for all of their help when it comes to many of the details included in the presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duncan. Do we have any questions from commissioners? If not, this is an information item, so thank you for your time.
Thank
Great
you.
presentation. Up next, we're on item 18, the funding augmentation request for active transportation and transit. Great to see you again, Paul.
Commissioners, tab 18 is an informational update on the Commission's proposed funding augmentations for active transportation and transit. To briefly recap, at the October 13th Commission meeting, the Commission approved a motion to request 2 one-time augmentations from the state's general fund surplus in the upcoming state budget. First was a $2 billion augmentation for the active transportation program. This would allow the Commission to fund the backlog of projects in the program. As a reminder, the 2021 program was the most competitive ever, with the Commission only able to fund 50 projects in the statewide and small urban and rural components, which is about 11% of the 454 applications received. The proposed active transportation program augmentation would also allow the Commission to create a pilot program for larger, more transformative projects, such as bicycle highways and complete community-wide active transportation networks, which are critical for encouraging people to shift from driving to biking and walking. This is aligned with California's ambitious goals in addressing the climate crisis by promoting mobility options that reduce vehicle miles traveled. The proposed augmentation also would help address the transportation needs of disadvantaged communities throughout the state by expanding mobility options and enhancing connectivity to housing, healthcare facilities, grocery stores, and other essential community services. Second, the Commission proposed a $2.5 billion augmentation for transit projects to be funded through the State Transportation Improvement Program, the STIP. This proposal also is aligned with California's climate goals to reduce vehicle miles traveled and vehicle emissions, and will help improve transportation equity by providing additional mobility options, including by connecting essential workers to their jobs. Under this proposal, 75% of the funds would be made available to each county throughout the state through the existing STIP formula to fund projects such as intermodal and transit facility improvements, zero-emission bus purchases and their infrastructure, and rail improvements and grade separations. The remaining 25% would be available for Caltrans for interregional rail projects. By funding transit and rail through the STIP, the proposal will allow regions to fund transit projects that meet their most urgent needs, provide an equitable distribution to all regions of the state, encourage partnerships between Caltrans and regions, and provide incentives to use resources in a timely and cost-effective manner. One last point regarding this transit proposal is that it was intended to provide additional funding for transit on top of the funding augmentation that had been proposed in last year's budget for the transit and intercity rail capital program and the Olympic projects. After the Commission approved these motions in October, Commission staff submitted the proposed funding requests to CalSTA and the Department of Finance for consideration in the Governor's January 10 budget proposal. Commission staff, along with Chair Norton, also recently briefed key legislators on the funding requests, including our ex officio members, Senator Newman, as well as Assemblymember Friedman, and will continue with additional legislative outreach in the coming weeks. And Commission staff also have been meeting with regional agencies and other stakeholders on the proposed augmentations as well. That concludes my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Before we go to questions, we have our very first speaker slip ever in 2021, Don Batiste. It's like, wow, I forgot these could be on paper still. Wow, exciting.
And tell us what she's won.
Yes. The
So-
right to speak to your
Thank you. Thank
CTC.
you very much. Dawn Batiste with the San Diego Association of Governments. I'd like to thank the CTC for the request for active transportation program and transit funding through the STIP. San Diego is very much in support of the request. Obviously, there's a huge need for both funding, and competitive programs have been oversubscribed for quite some time. Regions really are challenged to fund critical projects aimed to kind of promote equity and really transform our communities. So our Our staff at Sandag during development of the proposal communicated with CTC staff, and we had over $1 billion of transit-related needs that were listed just for San Diego region alone. So, but we are very much in support of this funding flowing through the STIP, where it can reach all regions in the state and really help promote and deliver the critical projects that the regions have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this important testimony. Paul, I did have a couple of questions for you, and I don't know if my other colleagues do, but my question, again, this goes back to explaining, getting out of the acronym speak on the STIP, but also if you could explain that for the public, and also how that is, the formula is.
Yeah, absolutely. So STIP stands for State Transportation Improvement Program. It's one of the state's longstanding transportation programs. And it has a formula whereby the funds in the program are divided between the state, Caltrans for interregional improvements, that's 25%. And then the remaining 75% is distributed via a formula based largely on population to each county in the state. The STIP can fund different types of projects. So it can fund roadway projects as well as transit. There has been a lack of funding, of new funding in the STIP from the public transportation account, which limits the funding available specifically for transit projects. So that's one of the impetuses for the commission's proposal, is to dedicate funds specifically for transit in the STIP.
Thank you. And a follow-up question is, does that help as we're asking for more multimodal projects as part of our freeway investments? How is that going to help agencies that have been asking for more transit dollars to really accomplish that? Because that's been a goal from the CTC to have more multimodal plans.
Yes, absolutely. So again, these funds would be earmarked specifically for transit projects in the STIP. So potentially could be combined with, the other STIP funds to do multimodal projects in that regard, but this would provide the important funding for the transit side and rail side.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, do you have any other comments you'd like to make? Okay, we do have one public comment, I see. And just so you know, we are, in all the other times, we've had no public comment. So this is the first time we've had.
Thank you, Chair Norton. We do have public comment on this at this time. We have Nicole Chang. Nicole, you're free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for this opportunity to comment. I'm Nicole Chang, a policy assistant with Climate Plan. Thank you for the commission's proposal. We support the commission's proposal to have more money for the program, but we need to see more sustainable funding. One-time augmentation does not change the systemic problem. I wanted to echo the sentiment that everyone recognizes that this program's oversubscribed, and it shows that we need to have more walkable and bikeable places to live. And so we would like to see the commission prioritize these projects through structural changes as well, and doing more work in implementing CAPTI. And so we look forward to working with you all in implementing the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. Thank you so much for this opportunity to comment again.
Thank you very much for providing comments today. If there are no other questions or comments, we want to thank you, Paul, for your great presentation. Next, we are on item 19, Hannah Walter and Giles Giovinazzi for Executive Order N1921 to help tackle supply chain issues in the United States Department of Transportation, CalSTA Strategic Partnership to Advance Supply Chain Resilience Infrastructure Projects.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. To present this item, I'd like to introduce Giles Giovinazzi. He's a senior advisor at the California State Transportation Agency, and he's done a lot of great work on this topic. Giles?
Okay, am I muted? Okay, it looks like I am. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Giles Giovinazzi. I'm the Senior Advisor at the California State Transportation Agency, and I'm providing an update and overview on supply chain challenges that we've been working on. If we can move to the next slide, please. So in this slide, I just want to provide some context with a few statistics to demonstrate the national economic significance of California ports. About 35% of U.S. container shipping traffic moves through the San Pedro Bay. And it's important to note that we're projected to see a significant increase in national imports and exports to California. So while we're all working to address supply chain challenges today, we also need to be thinking about the future too. Next slide, please. So looking at the current supply chain congestion issues, we should understand that we're witnessing a global phenomenon. Over the summer, major Chinese ports experienced multi-week partial terminal shutdowns because of COVID-19. There were also major factory shutdowns in other areas like Vietnam. And here in the United States, buying patterns shifted as demand for consumer goods surged. And so we've seen a significant increase in imports. Between January and September, containers imported through the ports of LA and Long Beach were 18% higher than over the same period during the previous peak year, which was 2018. As a result, we've all seen dozens of ships at anchor waiting to berth at the San Pedro Bay ports. We've also seen shortages of key equipment, including container chassis needed for trucks to transport shipping containers from the ports. Next slide, please. So in response to these supply chain challenges, the Biden-Harris administration has formed a federal intergovernmental White House supply chain task force. The task force includes representation from the U.S. Departments of Transportation, Labor, Agriculture, and others. In August, former U.S. DOT Deputy Secretary John Vakari was appointed port envoy to the task force. And some recent actions taken by the task force include biweekly reporting on supply chain metrics. Two metrics that I'll note here just include, on this slide, a 16% increase in imports to the ports of LA and Long Beach above the previous peak. So you see the surge in imports I noted earlier, and also 41% decrease in long-dwelling containers at ports during November, which with reports yesterday putting this number at 50%. I saw some media reports on that. So there are some indications of an improving situation. I'd also note that the ports of LA and Long Beach have announced they will be levying container fees on long-dwelling containers, although they postponed charging these fees until December 13th. And additionally, Port Envoy Vakari is coordinating with ports, terminals, and ocean carriers to provide sweeper vessels to remove empty containers from the ports. Next slide, please. The state of California is also taking steps to address supply chain congestion. In September, GoBiz, CalSTA, the Port of Long Beach, and CSU Long Beach partnered on the California Supply Chain Success Initiative. The initiative included a social media campaign, a virtual workshop, and an in-person summit with regional stakeholders at the Port of Long Beach. There's a final report that's being developed now and should be available soon. But key areas of consensus that came from the initiative and that we expect to be addressed in more detail in the final report include the need to create more temporary storage space for containers, increasing access to chassis, transitioning the supply chain to 24/7 operation, collecting and sharing data more effectively, growing and preparing the supply chain workforce, and investing in infrastructure to increase supply chain resilience. With regard to to sharing data, I'd note that this week the Federal Maritime Commission kicked off a series of meetings examining the need for standards and transparency to improve supply chain efficiency. Next slide, please. So and in October, Governor Newsom signed Executive Order N1921 to address supply chain challenges. The order directs several state actions, including DGS identifying state-owned properties that can be available to address short-term cargo container storage needs. And I believe GoBiz is also working with the private sector, private partners on this. California Labor Agency creating training and education programs to address logistics, workforce retention issues. The Department of Finance working with state agencies to develop long-term solutions for inclusion in the governor's budget. Next slide, please. And this just wanted to note some transportation-specific actions that are being taken under the executive order. Pursuant to the executive order, Caltrans is temporarily issuing overweight trucking permits for.
Giles, your mic is going in and out.
I'm sorry. Pursuant to the executive order, Caltrans is temporarily issuing
Giles?
overweight trucking permits.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Giles, your mic is going in and out. So if you could go back to the previous slide, you went nearly mute.
Okay.
And this is very interesting for us. So we really want to catch all of your presentation.
Can you hear me now?
Faintly. But please proceed.
Can we go back one slide?
Yes. But it would be great if we could just turn up the mic just a little bit.
I don't know if I can turn up the mic on my end.
Okay,
So.
this is better. Thanks.
So on this slide, okay, great. Governor Newsom signed Executive Order N1921 to address supply chain challenges. The order directs several state actions, including DGS identifying state-owned properties that can be available to address short-term cargo container storage needs. California Labor Agency creating workforce training and education programs to address logistics workforce retention issues. The Department of Finance working with state agencies to develop long-term solutions for inclusion in the governor's budget. Next slide, please. In this slide, I just wanted to note some transportation-specific actions that are being taken under the executive order. Pursuant to the executive order, Caltrans is temporarily issuing overweight trucking permits for international shipping containers through the end of June. Additionally, the California Department of Motor Vehicles is nearly doubling commercial driver's license testing capacity. Next slide, please. In his opening remarks, Secretary Kim noted that he wrote our congressional delegation to request robust federal funding for port and freight infrastructure, including funding for the deployment of zero-emission equipment at ports. I just wanted to highlight a few provisions recently passed in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that fund freight infrastructure. First, the Port Infrastructure Development Program is funded at $2.25 billion over 5 years. This is a discretionary program administered by MARAD. The multimodal cap for both the infra and national highway freight apportionment program were raised to 30%. This is something that both the Commission and CalSTA advocated for this year in this bill. The IIJA also creates a new national infrastructure project assistance program for mega projects funded at $15 billion over 5 years. And there's a program for reduction of truck emissions at port facilities funded at $400 million. Additionally, the Build Back Better Act federal budget reconciliation provides $600 million for the Maritime Administration to support supply chain resilience. This legislation passed the House and is currently pending in the Senate. Next slide, please. And in late October, CalSTA and the USDOT entered into an emerging projects agreement. Under the agreement, USDOT will provide enhanced technical assistance to projects seeking to enter the RIF or TIFIA federal credit programs. These programs provide federal credit assistance for infrastructure projects at Treasury rates or potentially even lower in certain circumstances. To qualify for this agreement, CalSTA provided USDOT a list of example projects. The vast majority of CalSTA's list was derived from the California Freight Mobility Plan, which is required by the FAST Act to include a list of priority projects for federal investment. So CalSTA drew largely from a list of projects that had already been developed through our state freight plan. It is important to note that CalSTA and USDOT can add or remove projects from the EMPA project list. So we would encourage freight stakeholders who have a serious interest in TIFIA or RIF programs to meet with us. I also want to emphasize that the projects listed in the Emerging Projects Agreement aren't guaranteed federal credit assistance. The agreement is for enhanced technical assistance, and these projects must be evaluated on an individual basis and undergo rigorous financial review. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation, and with that, I'd be willing to take any questions.
Commissioners, do you have any questions? I see Vice Chair Alvarado.
Okay, just an observation. I mean, we're going to be working our way through this. Dedicated routes and storage, local storage facilities.
Yeah.
Means we're increasing capacity. That needs to be noted. Up to 10,000 new licenses means 10,000 new trucks on the road. So you've got increased vehicle miles traveled, and you're probably going to have increased greenhouse gas emissions. So as we work our way through this problem, we need to understand that there's going to be a uptick in both of those. We didn't recognize the problem during COVID. There were local health agencies that would not allow carpooling. So where you used to have 4 guys in a truck driving from Tracy to San Francisco to work, now you have 4 trucks on the road. That wasn't included in the studies either. They just recognized the uptick. They didn't recognize the reasons for the uptick. So as we go into this, we need to go into this with our eyes open. You're going to have an increase in vehicle miles traveled. You're going to have an increase in greenhouse gases. So however we want to allow for that, we need to allow for it. But you can't deny that as we work our way through this backlog, there's going to be issues, because this is completely opposite of what we've been talking about for the last year and a half. So I don't think we want to get away from any of that stuff, but we just have to understand that working our way through this problem is going to cause a few other problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Eager and then Commissioner Inman.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because I was just going to talk about that, but also the importance, and I think we talked before about the importance of us working with our partners and what does that look like. The other thing is these are great that we have these aspirations to do this, but we also don't have any truck drivers. And so working with those state agencies that help train folks in order to get them into these jobs or get them to be able to buy their own trucks is going to be an important thing too for us to be looking at. So thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Inman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Giles and Secretary Kim, for your longstanding commitment on this journey. And I think Commissioner Alvarado was absolutely right in terms of we're talking about a lot of movements here. And what we are seeing in our system of systems is really front and center right now. And I think we need to take advantage of the opportunity that's presented. And a lot of the actions we're taking are additive, and we're going to have to keep adding more and more solutions. But I think for all of us, just, you mentioned some flex space. I think it's become very apparent to all of us that our waterfronts are just clogged. And so we need to have that resiliency built into that, so we have the ability. And then just to remind everybody, and to Commissioner Eager's point too, this is the largest public-private partnership we could have imagined. If you look at the transloading sector and this giant Rubik's Cube that we're all a part of. So I think that we're going to have to lean in. We're going to have to continue to focus. I'm encouraged of the increased federal funding, but it's still just a tip of the iceberg. And then when we begin to talk on the next item about our journey on alternative fuels, remember, we're pretty much energy hogs when it comes to moving all these goods in the goods movement sector. So we're really, really going to have to sit around the table and figure it out. But it's going to take an awful lot of commitment and a lot of hard work, really, to get us through this and make sure that we remain the nation's gateway. So I just want to thank everybody and thank our partners. Our ocean carriers have voluntarily joined a slow steaming program, which will help in the emissions issue. It's a little bit of a mess. So instead of having 100 vessels loitering offshore as the new term that's used, they're now coming in and taking a little longer to get here, which is economically better in terms of the fuel usage and everything. But it's kind of masking the issues that we have, this huge imbalance with the empty containers. We've got a chassis issue where our ocean carriers decided to get out of that business, and we tried to pass the baton in the relay race, and there's nobody to pass it to, really. So it was a little bit of a challenge. So I just want to encourage everybody and all of our partners that have your freight experts. We all have to lean in. And what we're experiencing now, unfortunately, in the supply chain is a huge increase in the cargo theft. And our Class 1 railroads, our Union Pacific Railroad has reported that they have 91 break-ins a day in SoCal. With the trains going into the intermodal yards, and just a huge issue for all of us to figure out how we can stop that, because it's kind of like the Wild West on the stagecoach robbers, to go back to my early career at Knott's Berry Farm. But it is tragic of what's happening, and they have reallocated their resources. Our rail partners do have policing powers, but they can't arrest folks fast enough. And it's primarily attacking those intermodal moves, which are our UPS and our FedEx containers. And they have, unfortunately, the ability to get into those containers, and they work in teams and just hand out those packages. And it's, a lot of the e-commerce, the way we've all changed our shopping patterns. So thank you.
Commissioner Liu, you had requested to speak, and then I have a question of Giles.
Great, thank you. Well, it looks like Christmas is coming early for some folks, Commissioner Rim, and I had no idea it had gotten that bad. That's just terrible. I don't think I've told you guys this before, but I went to a wedding once, and the person who was conducting the wedding said that, started off by saying, being married is an impossible situation. And everyone stopped and listened. He said, the only thing worse is being single. And that stuck with me. I think what we have here is a really impossible situation where Vice Chair Alvarado is absolutely right. I mean, when we solve this problem, it's going to cause more problems. But the only thing worse is where we are now and what we're stuck with, which is enormous emissions, complete dysfunction, and every aspect of supply chain being in a mess. It's good to see that there's been a little bit of progress. I have some ideas about that, but let me start with that emerging projects agreement list, which you heard Secretary Kim and Giles both say is subject to amendment, because when I first saw it, I kind of freaked out on him. And I had a long conversation with Giles and others at CalSTA about it, because there are some projects on there that are the complete antithesis of the equity and environmental justice and goals that we're trying to achieve, especially the intermodal rail yard proposals that are in there. It really kind of shook me. There's other things in there that I thought were a little problematic. So we had a long conversation. I think we got to a place where we're going to agree to work on that a bit. and bring in the folks who have good ideas, who can solve the problem, increase efficiency, reduce pollution, and try to get those projects funded and moving forward and on that list. I think what we're seeing when we look at a 41% decrease in how many containers are just sitting on the docks, why that happened. We have to look at the why of that. It happened because the ports threatened to impose a fee if you kept your container there too long. And so they flipped the economic situation. And that, I mean, to me, I had the opportunity to serve as a Stanton Fellow several years ago, 2014, 2015. And as a Stanton Fellow, I got to focus on trying to eliminate air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the freight sector. And I interviewed a bunch of experts, including former mayor of Long Beach, Bob Foster. And he told me, quote unquote, it's all about the money. And nothing has proven to be more true over the years. So we have right now a tension between the crisis and solving the crisis and record profits throughout the goods movement industry. The shippers are making enormous amounts of money. There's all this trucking demand. There's all these terminals moving through their less than 1% warehouse vacancy in our region. There's all kinds of things that are going on that provide a lot of economic motivation not to solve the crisis. But we have to get to a solution where people can still make money, but we're fixing it. And that's hard to do. Things like threatening to impose or actually imposing fees on things that are making the problem worse are the only way that I think we're gonna get to a solution. So one of the things I would recommend people focus on is who's making money, what can we do in order to make sure that their economic motivation, the way they make money, is by solving the problem, not adding to it. So that would kind of sum up my feelings about this. I went and wrote like 12,000, 1,200 words or whatever it was on this because I was so frustrated with it. And maybe I'll share it with you guys sometimes, which, I have nothing better to put you to sleep. I'm a little concerned, the characterization of that success meeting in September, Commissioner Inman and I were there, the conversation about the 24/7 thing. I mean, at that meeting, you guys got serious questions about the efficiency in the short term of trying to go to 24/7. It's a lot harder than it sounds. So I would recommend, before you call it a consensus on that, to go back to the comments that were made at that meeting, not by me, but by others, because I don't think it's being characterized actually as accurately as you think in that one. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. Please remember, it's all about the money. Let's figure out ways to provide economic motivations for people to solve this problem.
Thank you, Commissioner Liu. I had a question for Giles, and that is about state of good repair. And because we are traveling along these roads more often, we are moving in order to get the trucks moving and in order to get the cargo off the ships. And so I was wondering if in the federal programs, there's additional money just to add to the state of good repair instead of new capital outlays.
So there's significant, so I don't know. So there's significant increases in the federal programs across the board in the apportionment programs. For example, the National Highway, one of the biggest plus-ups was the National Highway Performance Program, which funds rehabilitation of the national highway system. I have to go back and take a look, at the bill, whether or not anything was specific. I mean, all of these, a number of these projects can be used, of course, for Fix It First and for rehabilitation. I don't know that anything was specifically called out correlating money with damage associated with freight movement. But there's a significant plus up of all the federal apportionment programs, and most significantly the National Highway Performance, the NHPP program, and also a new major bridge rehabilitation program, which California is going to get get, I think, $4.2 billion in guaranteed apportionment money. So I don't know that it's being called state of good repair, but there's a lot, there's a significant additional new money for bridge projects.
Thank you. While we're in this heightened opportunity to address these trips, I want to make sure we're earmarking enough money to make sure that after the trucks are going through and that we still have additional money for the roadways because they're being used so much more. So thank you very much. And I appreciate your summary on the plus ups on the highways and the bridges. And Commissioner Inman had, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I feel cheated that Vice Chair Alvarado is leaving because I was hoping to tap into his perspective and knowledge. It feels like a loss to me. I actually wanted to piggyback on some of your comments about the impacts, immediate impacts on VMT and air emissions. I actually had a specific question about the state properties. How are those being identified? And what are the nature of those sites? And the reason I ask that is, what are the potential impacts on communities with these containers moving to these sites?
Well, that's an excellent question. And there's a process that's being run. It's being run right now by DGS, and I'm not directly involved with sort of their process for identifying the properties. I think that the executive order calls for a listing of properties that can be made available by December 15th. And I need to verify this, but I think most of the provisions in this executive order are of a temporary nature, meaning they're not. These are actions that are going to be taken for a finite period of time. I have to go take a look. I have to go back and take a look at what's required with regard to the state properties. But maybe we can get you more detail from DGS in terms of how they're running that program.
Thank you very much. We have a public comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. We do have one attendee looking to make public comment at this time. We have Nancy Pfeffer.
Thank you, Nancy.
Great, thank you very much. My name is Nancy Pfeffer, and I'm Executive Director at the Gateway Cities Council of Governments. Our members are the local jurisdictions of Southeast Los Angeles County, including the Port of Long Beach, and our combined population is over 2 million residents. As you know, the communities in our region could be called the epicenter of freight movement in the state of California. The I-710, SR-91, I-605, I-105, and I-405 and I-5 freeways cut through every part of our region as they carry residents, goods, and services locally and onto the nation. We were pleased to see a renewed state and federal focus on supply chain and logistics issues, including the governor's executive order and the federal proposals for additional investment, as outlined in Secretary Kim's recent letter to U.S. DOT Secretary Buttigieg. However, we didn't see clearly included in the state's communication projects that would address the community impacts that can be expected to come with more intensive freight operations in LA and Long Beach, including proposed actions to deploy more and heavier drayage trucks along major freight corridors and moves towards 24/7 operations. For example, Secretary Kim's letter makes brief references to the I-710 South Corridor, but includes no specific investment in cleaner, heavy-duty vehicles using the corridor or the infrastructure needed to support them. This risks missing the opportunity to leverage new state funding initiated by the governor and supported by the state legislature to deploy 1,000 or more zero-emission trucks over the next 3 years. As you likely know, the LA County Metro Board recently recommitted $50 million in I-710 project funds to a clean truck program being developed for that corridor, a program that has been under discussion for several years. This commitment was highlighted in a recent joint letter sent from the Gateway Cities COG and Metro, addressed to both the Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission, requesting urgent and bold actions to deploy zero-emission trucks to the I-710 South Corridor. New state and federal policies direct investments to underserved communities. The Federal Justice 40 Initiative explicitly directs 40% of federal funding to communities precisely like those in the Gateway City. The California Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, includes among its guiding principles strengthening our commitment to social and racial equity by reducing public health and economic harms and maximizing community benefits to disproportionately impacted, disadvantaged, and low-income communities. Investments should also avoid placing new or exacerbating existing burdens on these communities, even if unintentional. These equity policy frameworks represent a timely opportunity for a broader partnership between the state and the federal government to assist our region with the long-standing impacts of freight movement. This is a key opportunity to leverage substantial funding commitments made by Metro, the state, and the Congress in the new infrastructure bill, and to advance the use of the cleanest possible vehicles in the communities where they are most urgently needed. I look forward to collaborating with you to bring about these important improvements in our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And with that, that's our last public comment and last comment from commissioners. Thank you, Giles, for your presentation. And we're going to move on to item 20, Hannah Walter. The update on Senate Bill 671, the Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment.
Yes, commissioners, let me give you an overview of the bill and our plan for how we want to complete this work. So this bill is exciting for a couple of reasons. One is because I think it is a solution to some of the problems that you've just been discussing, because it allows us to encourage freight and focus on freight, and at the same time, try to develop zero emissions pathways. And the other reason it's exciting is because it's one of the first times that the commission has been tasked with leading an effort like this. So we're excited to work on it. So Senate Bill 671 essentially requires us to lead an effort to identify freight corridors where it makes the most sense to build zero emission freight infrastructure, and then to identify projects that we could use to implement that infrastructure. And so one of the things that we want to do is we don't want to approach this effort telling all the industry experts what to do. We really want to take this opportunity to work with them and let their input guide our efforts so that we can try to work with them to build something that's really useful and the best for the state. We've already made great progress towards that goal. We've gotten some great contacts through the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance, and we've received some great input already. I'm just going to go briefly over the big picture. I'm not going to do my slides for the sake of time, but essentially the assessment is due in the form of a report for the legislature in December of 2023. We've divided the work into 3 phases. So in phase 1, we'll focus on identifying the freight corridors. In phase 2, we'll focus on identifying the projects. And phase 1 and phase 2 are both approximately 7 months. And then in phase 3, we'll focus on identifying barriers, solutions, and benefits like the bill requires. And that's the broad overview. And then let me just say a little more specifics about phase 1, which is where we are now. For identifying the corridors, we've started working with Caltrans GIS staff to create a map that overlays freight corridors with like where the energy grid is at, where there's more capacity in the grid, and also to look at where existing freight hydrogen stations are and where it would make sense to maybe locate new ones. So we're putting that together. We've also developed a list of criteria that we can use to select corridors. And our first work group is this Friday, the 10th. We welcome anyone who's interested in participating. And we're going to have monthly work groups and sub work groups thereafter. That's what we're doing on the identifying freight corridors. There's also a requirement to identify corridors that have the most contaminants related to freight, and we're going to be working with CARB and others on that. And then just two other quick things. There's some studies that we need to do early on. One of them is on the energy needs for battery electric. And so we're going to be working with the Energy Commission and other industry experts to look at what are some solutions, because the capacity of the grid to provide the amount of energy needed for charging freight, the heavy duty vehicles, is a challenge. And Chris Shimoda from Caltrex had highlighted some of those challenges in a previous presentation. And so we want to try to start thinking that through and thinking about solutions, and just the bill specifically asks us to look at things like microgrids, and we could look at battery storage, all that kind of stuff. So we need to start figuring that out now. And then the other place that we really want to think through early on is hydrogen. So when it comes to hydrogen and location, there's a lot of space needs to take into consideration, and they store the hydrogen above ground, I've learned. And so we're just thinking that through. It's also very expensive to install, so thinking about financing options for that. So those are studies we need to do early on to prepare ourselves to start thinking about projects. And we're going to need some significant funding to get that work done. But that concludes my overview, and I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Commissioners, do you have questions? Commissioner Falcon?
Hi, thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Hannah, for the presentation. The objectives and the goals of this is so important, and it's huge and a concern, I would say, with the trucking and freight industry, particularly those that do crossings on the border and in other states, and they're worried about the inability to charge and in those other areas outside of California. So what kind of discussions are happening on a larger scale on that? I'm hearing from communities that are very much impacted by this, communities meaning the business and the freight communities.
Yeah, so let me paraphrase your question to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So what you're saying is that there's a need to think beyond just our state borders when it comes to charging infrastructure, to make sure that that there's just utility there and people can use it that are in those locations. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because if they're being expected to transition to these newer technologies that take on the EV, the zero emissions and alternative fuels, they want to ensure that they have those fueling stations beyond California,
right,
to get their goods beyond our ports and to Mexico or to Arizona and beyond.
Right. No, that's a really good point, Commissioner. We have not gotten there yet in the study, but I will make note of it and make sure that we think about that as we're trying to think about these freight corridors and locations.
Okay, thank you, Hannah.
Commissioner Liu?
Just something real quick, Hannah, with regard to hydrogen. When it comes to heavy duty, there is no infrastructure, really. There's the opportunity to just ironically truck in tanks, drop them off, put in a station where you can actually fill. And there's at least one company that's doing that in the Port of Los Angeles. However, there is no actual heavy duty fueling infrastructure. What we have is a bunch of light duty, so passenger vehicle type cars, hydrogen fueling infrastructure in California that's been a real challenge to create. So it's something that does need a lot of attention, but there's no example to go off of at this point. So we're going to have our work cut out for us. But it seems really important that we do this. And I'm glad that you've already made so much progress, and the outline in terms of the 3 different phases seems to make a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And I just wanted to say that when we were looking at it, the California Fuel Cell Partnership has done some really good work in this area. And there's, I think, four or five. Thank you.
Thank you. Great report. I wanted to make sure, since we don't have any more public comment on this item, correct? Or we do? Okay. Public comment then?
Thank you, Chair Norton. We do have one attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Janet Whittick. Janet, you're free to unmute yourself and make your comment. Janet Whittick, you're free to unmute yourself and make your comment at this time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, Chair Norton and Commissioners. My name is Janet Whittick, and I'm the Vice President of the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance, also known as CEED. We're a coalition of business, labor, and public leaders that work on state environmental policy issues, including advanced clean fleets, the rulemaking at CARB. And so among our membership, we have energy providers, utilities, goods movement providers, and some of the largest fleets in California, all of whom are working towards a zero-emission, carbon-neutral transportation system. We really see this work on SB 671 as a critical piece of the puzzle. One of the things we've been struggling with is what we see as the lack of coordinated planning on infrastructure across the state agencies. So we're really excited about the opportunity that SB 671 presents and what we hope will be really good work at the commission and leadership of this body in trying to help assess our freight infrastructure needs. And really, I'm here today to underscore the need for adequate funding and staffing for this effort. I think as you know, Commissioner Falcon and Lou have pointed out, this is a very big task and a lot of work is needed. And really, this work is too important to end up sitting on the shelf. So we very much support adequate funding for the commission and its staff. I would also say that, you know, one of the key challenges to building out the infrastructure that we need is the time it takes to get projects off the ground. So I'd like to ask the commission to consider doing a programmatic EIR as part of the freight assessment plan, because I think that could greatly help speed permitting for zero emission infrastructure projects and actually get us all actually to building the projects and not just talking about them. So thank you for your time this evening. We look forward to working with the commission, with Hannah and everybody, and are excited about this effort.
Hannah, do you have a response on the programmatic EIR suggestion?
I think it's a great idea. I think we should pursue it.
Okay, great. Mitch?
We will give that consideration.
Right. That's what I meant.
Yeah. Okay. Carl Gardino, Commissioner Gardino, and then Fran Inman, Commissioner Inman.
Thank you, Chair Norton. And I want to build on what Commissioner Liu said on hydrogen as we look at this. There's a great resource here in Southern California, a person by the name of Janice Lin, who has been leading for quite some time an effort called High Deal LA, High Deal Los Angeles, bringing together numerous stakeholders in coordination with the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed and signed by the president several weeks ago, which allocates $8 billion nationally for different hydrogen hubs throughout the United States. And the one that Janice Lin and her allies are trying to identify to compete as one of those hydrogen hubs is all around green hydrogen, because hydrogen is a rainbow, and not all the colors of the rainbow are what we would want to support. Green hydrogen is what most people believe is worth supporting. So if you'd like to be put in touch with Janice Lin, we can certainly help to do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Commissioner Inman?
Yes.
I just want to reinforce the comments by my fellow commissioners and by Janet from SEEB in terms of the importance of doing this right. Hannah has been doing an amazing job of building a network of resources and gathering information, but it is a huge, huge task and is a huge responsibility. And I would offer up that it may be the most important thing that we can do to serve the state of California right now is to get this right. And we're not talking about a simple task. I think it's complicated, and we're going to be flying the plane while we're building it. And the timing, you know, as Janet pointed out, once we figure out where we need which infrastructure, just getting it delivered, because we don't want to redo what our buddy Dorn Barnes has lived through at Foothill Transit by being, you know, the guy that steps forward and says, I'm going to be the first guy and I'm going to try it and I'm going to make this work. And then the scar tissue that he has, and he's just ordered 33 hydrogen buses, I might add too. So he's learning along the way too. So whatever we can do with some pilots, perhaps there may be some pilots that we need to do. Janet mentioned, you know, coordinated assumptions. I mean, are we all working with the same forecasts? One of the things Hannah is working with the Army Corps, trying to work with the Army Corps research team, is really getting good data so that we can really make sure that we are making informed decisions on really relevant data so that we can. And clearly we're sitting in the Inland Empire, and that's ground zero for the transload end of this barbell. So SoCal, we need everybody to lean in. If you have resources available, bring them to the table. Let's all sit. You know, during SB1, it was a summer of CTC workshops. And I would argue on 671, we're going to have the season of workshops to get all the voices in. And nobody has one answer. It's going to be integrated, concerted effort by everybody and multiple fuel sources probably. To be able to do the medium duty, the light duty, and the heavy duty. So Hannah, good job. And it's on all of our shoulders to make sure, and Senator Newman, you can help us make sure we have adequate resources to do what you all ask us to do. Thank you.
Mitch, you have some comments?
Yeah, just a couple of things real quick. We do agree on the need for data. One of the things Hannah had put together was a proposal for some data and a tool, and we passed that off to Caltrans. It wasn't really something. It was a bigger than we were as commission staff could take on, but it was a great idea, and I'm hoping that moves forward in the administration's budget proposal. I think that was close to $1 million. So that was great. We are also we are definitely cognizant of the resource need. I think I've said that several times already today. And this is one of the things that has particularly impacted Hannah. When the SB1 passed, there was some freight that the implementing legislation for trade corridor program came a little bit later. And so we ended up not getting a position. So Hannah, who was originally charged with road charge, got told half her job is now freight. And she's done a fantastic job on both, but these are also two areas where we now have a lot more work. And so we definitely have a significant ask to grow our resources in those areas and be able to deliver the results we need to.
That's great. Vice Chair Alvarado.
Well, just as a final thought, we need to go into this. So like everybody says, it's gonna be a lot of work. And we need to go into this with our eyes open. It's not going to be cheap.
Yep.
And if you try and do it cheap, you're going to fail. If you see what I just paid for a hybrid pickup truck, I can't imagine what a big rig's going to cost. But it's good. You got to, like you said, you got to make a plan. You got to commit the resources if you want it to be successful. So I would not be shy, and I encourage you to not be shy about shooting for the stars because they're going to try and back you down a little bit.
Commissioner, they already have. So we submitted our proposal.
Yeah. So what I think that going forward,
No, but there you go. Which is why we need to be realistic about this.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to go cheap, you're going to fail.
I agree.
Yeah, and that is the last thing we want to do.
Right.
So we have put together a proposal. What we will do is reach out to a number of commissioners and get their input on the proposal. And if we need to revise it up, we will do that.
Why don't you do us a favor and just go big and we'll revise it down?
Yeah.
Sounds
It's
good.
always better. My father taught me from when I was a little kid, it's always better to ask forgiveness and for permission.
Yes, sir.
I just want to ask that included in that, we also include the ITSs and Metrans and make sure that we have money in SB1 to have the academia participate. Let's go big on that as well.
And Joe and I are raising money for hydrogen plants in Arizona on 10 and in Nevada on 80.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Great presentation, and we're fully behind you, is what we're trying to say. Thank you, all of you, who are in the audience. We are going to move forward with our agenda until 5:30 because we have a lot to get through. And so we're going to move quickly. Item 21, Tim Silverman.
Thank you, Chair Norton, and good evening, Commissioners. This item 21 is an action item. The Commission adopted Transportation Asset Management Plan guidelines in 2017, following the requirement of Senate Bill 486. These guidelines required that the plan include pavement, bridge, drainage, TMS, as well as a list of supplementary assets on the state highway system. Per Government Code 14526.4C, the Commission shall adopt targets and performance measures reflecting state transportation goals and objectives. At the request of the Commission, Caltrans reevaluated the performance targets for the supplementary assets and is proposing revisions to those targets currently in the Transportation Asset Management Plan. In addition, Caltrans is proposing to change one of the supplementary assets. Mike Johnson, the statewide asset management engineer for Caltrans, is here to present their proposal.
Thank you, Tim. Good evening, Commissioners, Madam Chair. Good to see everybody in 3 dimensions for the first time in a long time. We could cue up the presentation. Thank you. So as Tim mentioned, in June, we had submitted our performance benchmark report, which is an annual report we put together that document how we're doing with respect to the commitments made in Senate Bill 1. One of the Commission's comments was to look at the supplemental asset classes. There is no specific SB1 metric for these, but when they were initially established, to be honest, we really had our hands full with the 4 core assets, and there were some simplifying assumptions made for some of these supplemental assets. And as we've matured, we felt it was a good time to go back and take a good look at those. So this book item is an action item, actually has 2 different actions. The first is to adopt revised targets for a number of the supplemental assets. And the second portion is to adopt or consider the adoption of a change in the supplemental asset class definition. In terms of what are these supplemental asset classes, there's a listing of them. Just in the interest of time, I won't go through all of them. But what they all share in common, and the reason they're called supplemental assets, is not that they're less important than other components of the system. All of these assets were classified this way because at the time they were set, they all had an age-based condition breakdown. In other words, there's no formal inspection program occurring on any of these things. And so that limits really what you can do from an asset management perspective. The targets serve a couple purposes. So, within the State Highway System Management Plan, which we produce every other year and bring to the commission, we are required by state law to develop an unconstrained need for the state highway system. That is the primary purpose of these targets, is that they establish what that finish line is. So it's like if you're running a race and you need to know how far your race is. Well, it depends on where you're starting from, and it depends on where that finish line is. And as we adjust the targets, we're really moving the finish line around. I think that covers most of this here. As far as the condition reporting, I mentioned there's no formal condition assessment, and in age is the best surrogate we have for condition. However, it has some real shortcomings. And one of those shortcomings is a lot of times older assets can be perfectly functional and be classified as poor just because of their age. It doesn't mean they're unsafe. No, not like you, Commissioner Inman. I heard that. But we're doing a job, right? But we're a little bit older than we used to be, right? And the same of some of these older assets. And so I want to make it clear that in an age-based classification, poor does not mean unsafe. And in fact, it doesn't even mean that it doesn't work. And I'll give you some specific examples here. So I like this one. This is our headquarters Caltrans building in Sacramento. Many of you in the audience work in the building, and some of you up here work in the building. By our age-based criteria, this building would have been considered poor in 1986, which means for my entire career that we've been working in this building, it's been poor, but it has been open and safe and fully utilized that entire time. So it kind of underscores this idea that poor doesn't mean we can't use it or that it's unsafe. Now, tomorrow probably, or maybe later today, you'll hear about our facilities infrastructure plan, our office buildings from Shannon Simlai. You'll hear the term assessments, and these are assessments that Shannon can initiate through the Department of General Services for buildings that we're considering replacing or are on a short list to potentially be replaced. That is an inspection of sorts, but even for the office buildings, we're not getting a complete inspection on a regular basis of all office buildings in the inventory, and definitely not things like maintenance stations and equipment shops and other things. Another example is highway lighting. I happen to be in Oceanside around Thanksgiving, and I took this picture. And before someone tells me, I realize this is not actually a state highway anymore. But I thought it was really nice because we do have a lot of older lights that have historic significance that will be beyond this 40-year age that would classify them as poor, but we really have no intention of trying to replace these lights because they would help ruin the character a little bit of this historic area. So here's another example where you're going to be poor, but we really have no intention of doing action on that because of this nature. And so when we look at how big these poor targets are that we're recommending, you have to consider that there are some assets in there that we actually don't ever propose to really do anything to, or at least not in the near future, like these old historic lights. Well, this would have animated real well, but I wanted to just quickly go through how we set these poor targets. This is not, a real hard science. There's a lot of judgment in this. But we start with poor for all of these assets because the amount of poor is really determined by our ability to get work that flows into poor out and how much time that takes. So if you can imagine in year one, we had only 2 assets that were poor, and it doesn't matter which of these we're talking about. In year 2, those 2 are being worked on, but 2 more are coming into the mix. And by year 3, you have 4 more plus the 2 we originally started working on. And so if you work through this process, it literally takes you 6 years to get those original 2 assets out of poor and back up into a better condition. That is one of the limiting factors that sets what we call the minimum poor quantity. And so this basic methodology is used for all of the supplemental asset classes. And it's really influenced by how fast things deteriorate from fair to poor and how big the class of fair is. So if you have a really big fair class, you have a fast deterioration rate, then your poor target's going to be a little bit higher. When we talk about setting fair targets, it's something very different because here we're looking at more life cycle cost type considerations, and we're looking for a break point, and it's represented in this graph for overhead sign structures by the dashed vertical line. At that point, we could get better performance going to the left of that line, but it's going to start costing us incrementally quite a bit more. There would be really no good reason to have a target to the right because we have lesser condition for the same price. So that doesn't make any sense. So you can see in the dot on the very far right, that's where our current target is. And the sort of hollow red circle is where we're recommending the new target be. So we're shifting fair a lot more aggressive, but we're lessening the poor. These are the recommended targets. They're in the book item. I just thought I'd put them in here for the sake of having them in. The other action that I wanted to bring forward has to do with one of the supplementary asset classes that it's titled Park and Ride and Sidewalks. But if you read the commission's guidelines, there's a bunch of footnotes on it. And if you get down into the footnotes, you come to realize that it is only representing those assets that had American with Disability Act deficiencies. So it's not truly an inventory. In fact, it's not really even an asset. It's a deficiency of an asset.
Mm-hmm.
We put that in there at the time because both Caltrans and the commission wanted to start bolstering our commitment to other modes, non-vehicle modes, bike, ped, and transit. And we didn't have those inventories. We have since built those inventories. And so I'm recommending that we pull that one out that was never really a good fit and replace it with the actual bike and pedestrian infrastructure inventories.
Mm-hmm.
That will allow us to better do asset management on the bike and ped modes because we have an actual inventory condition breakdown. We could do deterioration modeling. We can't do any of that on the ADA infrastructure. I say that, and I realize the political optics of this, but I have to say that this in no means diminishes our commitment to do the ADA work. We have a specific objective in the State Highway System Management Plan for this, as well as a court settlement that we have to report on quite regularly that make sure that we make progress in that area as well. I just think there is a better place to do that other than the supplemental asset classes. So I'm recommending this swap. So in conclusion, if we did these things, I think it'll better reflect the unconstrained need that we have. So when we do the next State Highway System Management Plan, there would be a slight reduction, about 3%. I think we estimate in the unconstrained need. That's assuming everything else stayed the same, which I don't think they will. But we will better be able to do asset management on the bike and ped infrastructure. And, as we're doing this, asset management continues to mature and we continue to work with other programs. Even since we first set these targets, one of the supplemental asset classes, the overhead sign structure, we've actually moved to a condition-based inspection program for those. And we're talking to other programs about what it would take to do that as well. But there's a lot of implications, resources and other things are ramping up to do that. But that is part of our ongoing progression and maturity, I think, in asset management to ultimately get away from purely age-based condition assessments into either a hybrid or a full condition-based.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. what the commission may have.
Vice Chair Alvarado, and then I have a question.
Just going back to your, more in the buildings than supplemental stuff. You know, and let's just use that Caltrans headquarters as an example. So that's a building that was in supposedly poor condition. But we're in it 35 years later. I think you need to take a wider look at it though. I mean, the structure itself may be safe, but by the time you throw in operating costs, you know, just trying to remodel the thing to make it work for a modern workforce, you know, they don't have the fiber optics that we need these days. They don't have a lot of stuff that we need these days. So I think when we go to classify these buildings or rate them, we need to put structure in one bucket and really feasibility of use in another bucket. Because you can have an excellent structure and one monster of a building that just really is useless. And even single pane windows in a lot of these buildings, just the operating costs, yearly operating costs, would more than justify tearing the thing down. But if you have a good structure, let's just talk about refurbishing the building rather than rebuilding it. But there's got to be some sort of a way to differentiate structure from feasibility.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And in fact, we've been having those conversations already because it's the structure, it's the HVAC systems, it's electrical systems, plumbing, you know, so you have all your major subsystems of that building, then you have function, then you can bring in lead type of discussions. Is this a green building or not a green building? The operational costs. So all of that, you know, sort of adds to the complexity of how you assess these buildings. And right now what we have, you know, we have a few buildings that have been done, and Shannon can talk in more detail about that when she presents, but it's not a comprehensive picture of just even the office buildings. And then we have, you know, hundreds of maintenance stations. We have equipment shops. We have transportation laboratories. We have hundreds and hundreds of buildings that are in theory within the purview of the shop to maintain and do asset management on. And so, you know, we understand that we need to get to a better place, and we're working to do that. But where we are today in terms of what we have available, it is still limiting us to some degree.
Yeah. I wanted to ask my question about the overhead signs and especially on the freeways and everywhere. We really have to get back to better lighting of our signs and just a totally different way of making sure that we have better visibility. I don't know if this is happening for many of you, but these signs are not reflective. There are people who are making horrible decisions because they can't read the signs. And I can tell you that if I didn't have a, you know, GPS in my car that was telling me how I could get certain places at night, so many of the signs can't be seen. And John Malinsky was here, who's a former Caltrans director of District 7. And back 2 years ago, I asked for a sign audit because these signs are not visible. They are in terrible condition, and they are, I think, very risky for travelers. And so I would really like to find out what you are doing about sign conditions, sign visibility, and not being satisfied with just reflectiveness, especially since, you know, the where my headlights are versus where Vice Chair Alvarado's headlights are on the truck he just bought are very, very different. And I think we are having I see it on on-ramps and off-ramps all the time that people can't see the signs, and they're really having issues about it. So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the sign conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. So first I would, you know, be willing to go back and get some information. What you're asking about is the sign visibility or reflectivity. This supplemental asset class that we're talking about is just the structure that holds the sign. So these are two different things, but the shop does have a program specifically for the sign panels themselves. So we have a mechanism to fund that. And I'll be happy to get some information on how those sign reflectivities are being assessed on an ongoing basis so we can identify those panels. They're not particularly expensive from, from a normal transportation perspective to get in there and replace these sign panels.
I think we're choosing to make more signs reflective than lighting them. And I question that decision. Like, I think we need to go back and say, was that a good idea? It may save energy, but it's not saving lives, honestly. They're not sufficient. So I just would like to see if we could make sure we can review that and see whether or not we still want to have unlit signs and just dependent on reflection as our way of being able to have signs visible in the evenings. So
I appreciate that. And I'll take that back and get you a response from the department. It's not my particular area of expertise, so I don't want to speak out of turn here.
okay. Commissioners, do you have any other comments you want to make? Commissioner Inman?
Well, just to build on Commissioner Alvarado, and I guess is one of those poor commissioners, if we're going to age, put us in the age category here. But I think without physical inspections and without the annual operating cost analysis, we could be penny wise and pound foolish. And so I think my question would be, what would it take to get you the resources so that you really could figure out how best for us to spend our bucks other than just based on some assets' age?
It's a great point, and it's something that we're actively working on as we speak in terms of not just how we do office buildings, but we're kind of looking at all these buildings because they all have similar shortcomings in terms of how they're being managed right now. So we would like to get to a better place. We're working on a plan, and part of that plan will be to define the resources necessary to do that.
Mitch?
Yeah, and as Mike mentioned, we'll be talking more about facilities tomorrow. And one of the comments we'll be making is, in the good old days, like 3-4 years ago, we used to get a lot more information. So we're going to be meeting with them to figure out why we are not exactly to get to some of the issues that are raised, particularly with the facilities and the office buildings. In terms of the other assets, Mike, I know some cities have apps where, you're able to like say, hey, there's a pothole here, and some crowdsource some of that condition assessment. And I have no idea whether that adds any value or not, or there's just a lot of people really pissed off at the city going around giving them bad information. Have you guys looked into that at all for some things?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that the public can do that. One is through a service request through our webpage. So if they, hit the same pothole every day, they can put in a service request, and our local maintenance crew will come out and take care of that. I believe we also have a way to do that within the Waze application. At least that was my understanding, but I haven't looked at it recently, like in the last year or so. But I think there's a place to say there's a pothole here or maintenance needed within Waze, and so you can get some of that crowdsourcing information.
It might be interesting to see if there's a way to do that, and perhaps expand it with other things. This lighting sucks, or whatever. And
that would be a good button. Tim, do you want to advise us about this item since it is an action item?
Okay, this is the first time I pressed a button. Yes, Commission staff has reviewed the material and recommends approval.
Okay, could we entertain a motion? Eager, Inman, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
And I know it's late, but I do want to just give my 2 minutes for Commissioner Alvarado because he was the chair of the commission during, I would say, the early days of asset management in the rough times. And he knows what I'm talking about. Your patience and guidance. And as Mike mentioned, the way that you treat the folks that are up here is very much appreciated. So wish you all your best in retirement.
Well, and on that kind note, we are adjourned for today. See you tomorrow at 9.